Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the movie Doctor Strange. So, this movie could be honestly odd. This movie could be indifferent. This movie could be magical, I guess you could say at the end of the day. Or it could just be weird. So, let's go into this. Let's talk about a movie that could ultimately be maybe not a doctor, but maybe a strange movie to watch. So when going into this film, I think I honestly have a quasi different opinion about this movie than I did originally. I don't think it feels like a negative opinion. I'm just like, you know what? Like, this guy doesn't really drastically change from the beginning of the movie to the end. Like, really, he doesn't make like an overly drastic shift to where all of a sudden he's like, oh my god, I feel differently about everything. I should just drastically change everything that I've ever done in my life. No, like basically he's a hole from day one to the end of the movie. So basically, really in the early movie, or really in the early points of the movie, he's an a hole just because he's a know it all. He's a know it all. He's a know it all. He saves everybody. He's like House. Like basically, he's like House. Like he has information that no one else has, and ultimately, he can just be able to save and cure everyone just because he just has this seemingly tiny bit of knowledge that other people are just easily to just look over and just say, oh, okay, well, this person's dead. Where Strange's character ultimately comes in and is like, no, this person is dead. He's still alive. It's just you were too much of a stupid person to not notice that this person was still alive. He's almost dying, but I'm going to go in and save him. That could because that's who I am. I'm the savior of almost dead people. So evidently, Doctor Strange accumulates just all this random knowledge by having a photographic memory, and so reasonably, Doctor Strange is just a genius just because of how his noggin works, and so reasonably, we just have Strange who is just he's an know-it-all just because reasonably if his brain didn't function a certain way, it probably wouldn't make him so. And so then reasonably he would nothing to be smug about because he would have to have worked really hard to be able to do everything that he does. So we have an a-hole from start of the movie to the end, and when looking at it, a lot of people can make that consensus of like, well, what's wrong with the person that is a-hole? Like when looking at it, like Robert Downey Jr. a lot of times wasn't always the nicest person to everyone. Case in point, Captain America. Normally, like within the first Avengers movie, when they finally meet and they lock eyes with one another, it's basically just like, who are you? Well, who are you? Like, dude, everything that came out of you came out of a bottle. There's nothing special about you. And so on and so forth. So, yeah, I guess there are certain a-holes that I guess could be amended. Uh, because when looking at it, like a character like Robert Downey Jr., reasonably has kind of all like he has much more of an onion kind of layer to him. Like he's very much has a lot of layers, and ultimately he comes to consensuses, and he ultimately has that the cue of knowledge when he realizes that like, oh well, hey, yeah, like I was a jerk to you, but now I'm going to try to change, or now I'm going to try to be different. Doctor Strange, I guess, within this first movie, or any times that you will see him beyond this point, will give into things a little bit, but still, like, he is still so severely guarded and so severely, like, he's not willing to completely change who he is just to ultimately get the girl or get the win or get people to work with him. No, it's like, hey, this is just who I am, and F you if you don't like it. Kind of saying a lot of cuss words quasi into this review, but that's kind of how I feel about this character. Is just that this character just is just like, hey man, like this is all gonna just work out for me, and I know it will be because like I will it to be. I will it so. So, anyways, I still second time around find stuff to still be funny. I think the jokes still, whenever we get them, do land. Because most of this movie is really just effects. Realistically, it basically reminds me a little too much of the Leonardo DiCaprio film Inception to me. Because when watching Inception, I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I wonder where this movie got that preference from of having all these things shift around and to the point to where it kind of like scrambles your brain towards the second half of the movie because like they really go deep dive into Inception with this whole thing, and I was like, God, this is so much work for a Doctor Strange film, which ultimately is the origin movie, which I'm like, you probably should have had this kind of stuff all done when the movie had some bigger threat or had some bigger important key element to it. I don't know. I don't quite understand why doing this in the origin movie, cuz basically it's just going to be like, "Hey man, this movie might suck, but at least it looks visually interesting." If people hate the movie, then they'll probably just like the visual parts of it, or they'll probably like the Inception part of it because ultimately Inception just recently came out. So if they're gonna like, and plus they had to kind of promote this kind of visual style in the trailers and stuff like that. They had to kind of showcase that they're gonna go this risky route and like, hey man, like we're gonna take some. I think they were probably also hoping that they were gonna get some like Oscar nods or something for this movie, or some visual effects nods or something. But anyways, so when when going into this, I think the important thing that really comes up at the very end of this film is what Mordo ends up saying to Doctor Strange as he leaves. I think that line alone is the key thing to this entire movie. Ultimately, people can just be like, "Well, hey, this is a guy that doesn't know any better," or "Hey, this is a guy that ultimately is going to come to Strange's side," or "Oh, this is a guy that's going to ultimately, like, of course, this is how he's going to go against Strange." But ultimately, it seems like the words and the stuff that people are saying and the stuff that goes on in this movie is really just like, wow, like everyone is taking magic and they are doing the worst kind of magic. And that's what I like about this movie. People are doing the worst kind of magic to say that they're trying to do good and reasonably there's going to be a cause and effect to all that. There's going to be like, at some point there is no turning back, where it's just like, okay, well, yeah, you've messed up the time continuum, you've messed up you've messed up multiverses, you've messed up any number of things, and how far is too far? You have one person that is siphoning off evil, and how far is too far? That is the whole thing that happens very towards the end of the movie, which I really appreciated. Was, if you think that you are doing good by, like, you could be honestly wrong from a certain perspective. You could be messing with things that are beyond your reach, beyond your, and somebody's going to come for you that ultimately is way beyond your power, and you're just gonna be like, oh well, crap, well, I guess I'm gonna die now. Well, I guess I'm gonna just there's no outwitting this person, there's no outbeating this person, because I'm assuming at some point, yeah, we're gonna probably have like maybe all these time travel entities that are ultimately gonna come out and just be frustrated that everybody did what they did. But when also looking at it, I think eventually this is going to easily have eventually the Beyonder being here. Not to probably do a secret war of sorts, which will probably end up happening anyways, because we have Spider Man, so maybe he'll be shoved into Secret War, and that's probably how we'll get eventually to have it be that Spider Man gets the black symbiote and do that. Could be a possibility. But when looking at it, really, I think the Beyonder is eventually going to show up probably in a Doctor Strange film, because what other threat is he going to have besides Dormammu? Reasonably and rationally, I think Beyonder would be a perfect villain for Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange, his powers are kind of like all over the place, and so reasonably, if you have a character that seems to be all over the place, basically have another character that almost can nerf that power. Like, who else is going to be able to take down or be a real, true, legitimate threat for Doctor Strange? Well, the Watcher, and that's probably about it. There's nobody else. So, anyways, I I enjoyed the ride of this movie again. I enjoyed that Doctor Strange seems to have a romantic relationship in this movie. But other than that, reasonably, like, to me, I was like, yeah. When finally watching this again, I'm like, yeah, I don't like how I don't like. I can probably even justify with Mordell in this movie. I can, like, people could say the ends justify the means. I honestly and truly don't think that works in this movie. I think what people are doing is wrong. And then they keep doing it wrong. They keep going back into time. They keep adjusting things, and they don't realize what they are doing because they think it's right. Cheating is right. And that's the thing that I can't accept for this Doctor Strange world. Is cheating is okay. When looking at the real Ghostbusters movie, or the real Ghostbusters episode Night Game, where ultimately they say no one could be neutral. If good cheats, evil automatically wins. So when looking at that episode of the Real Ghostbusters night, the episode called Night Game, if good cheats, evil automatically wins. So is that where we are eventually going to head to within these next Doctor Strange movies? Is to finally say, okay, well, good cheated, so now evil is going to have to decimate Doctor Strange and everyone because of what they have done. Because Mordo will eventually be right. So, let's go into spoilers about this movie. Let's kind of quickly go throughout and talk about this movie. Because recently there is a lot going on, but then again there isn't. There is, but there isn't. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we can spoil this movie. So recently we have, of course, the beginning scene where we have Doctor Strange ultimately going through and seemingly doing surgery, where he ultimately is also having to be challenged to know some music. Ultimately, he, of course, knows the tune and knows what year it came out. And Wikipedia is saying it's like, oh, it's 1978. And he's like, no, it's 1977. I know. And then ultimately, he's ultimately correct. So we find out that Doctor Strange has a useful brain worth of useless knowledge. And so recently, that's good for him that he knows so much about music that it's redonkulous. So going in, we have ultimately Christine Palmer, who we find out has had a previous relationship with Doctor Strange to the point of she no longer wanting to date any co-workers because of Strange, because ultimately she dubs it the strange law, or the strange act, or the strange whatever. The inability for her to date her coworkers is all because of Strange's doing. So we have it to where in the early stages, Christine is going to Strange's help. Ultimately, just be like, hey, like, I needed a second opinion, and ultimately, I want you to check out this person's brain. Ultimately, Strange looks at the x ray and says, yeah, there's a bullet lodged in this guy's head. And Palmer is like, yeah, I thought the same thing. And so Strange just goes and dives right into another doctor's patient, and just takes his bullet out and saves the patient before they die, because this person was supposed to be going to be dead and to be shelled out to these donors. But instead, Strange saves this person before he actually dies, and then Strange just walks out like, "Yeah, I saved one of your patients." So we have it to where Strange is ultimately, I guess, going to some meeting somewhere, but then eventually he ends up getting called in the middle of the night to go into his patient list. It seems like he's fiddling around with his phone, or he's fiddling around with his car, and fiddling around, just not really paying attention at all the road. He's ultimately doing a consultation with the guy that's giving him a patient list of every unique possible patient that he could try to treat. And recently, he's throwing a lot of them off to the side because, like, yeah, there's 50 other doctors that can treat this person. Like, I don't care. I want something rare. I want something interesting. So, while We have it to where eventually Strange is finally consenting to one of the patients ultimately getting the x-rays of the person. We eventually have Strange getting into an accident that ultimately flips his car numerous times over to the point of him ending up injuring his hands via this accident, and ultimately looked gruesome and a bloody mess. Ultimately have an eye that is swollen and everything like that. So of course, Strange ends up waking up, and ultimately he has all kinds of uh, like uh, like steel plates like put into his fingers and all kinds of things, like basically screws all up in his hands and stuff like that. And Christine is ultimately saying like, yeah, this is what we did with all your hands. Like they were mangled beyond repair and dot 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 dot. But ultimately, have Doctor Strange that's like, oh my god, what did they do to me? And Christine was like, they did the best they could. There's nobody that could have done better. And of course, that's when Strange hits her with, I could have done better. Well, then go back in time and heal your hands, and then you'll never have to do this. You'll never have to be Doctor Strange. Or ultimately, you will still probably have to forcibly tell yourself in the past, hey, be Doctor Strange anyways. Completely avoid this car accident that ultimately doesn't make you Doctor Strange, and then you will never be Doctor Strange, and then ultimately you will never save everyone in Endgame, and then the world will be annihilated because you selfishly wanted to have your hands be completely and utterly okay. So, anyways, we have it to where Strange is now going through numerous, like, ultimately paying anybody that he can to any absurd degree. Ultimately, like, telling them it's like going and doing Zoom calls with doctors from overseas to ultimately ask if they could be able to perform this procedure. Everyone's telling him that it's impossible. He's trying to accelerate his healing of his hands, and that's not working. And so, reasonably, everything that he's doing is not going to work. His hands are shaking, and so, reasonably, he can barely shave himself. I'm sure he can barely hold his wang while he pees. I I'm sure he probably like it sucks to do anything. Put on clothes, play the piano. I'm making jokes and that's horrible, but still, uh, that's a horrible thing to do. But anyways, yeah, if my freaking like you can have a life of just consistent like pain, like live in pain 24/7, and that's the life that you end up living for how who knows how long. So we have to where ultimately Doctor Strange is realizing that like he can no longer be a doctor again, and so reasonably he is trying to excel his like trying to excel his healing process, and also going into rehab extensively. And we have some rehab esh like doctor esh like person that is working with Strange, and ultimately Strange is like, hey, have you ever had a horrific injury that ultimately been able to be reversed? And the rehabilitator ultimately says, well, yeah, like we had a guy with a broken back, and he came back to me years later, and he was completely fine. Like he wasn't even able to walk, and like I saw him, and he was walking to me. Wow, what a miraculous story! It's kind of like the Unstoppable or the Unbreakable movie where Bruce Willis is in the train and he's miraculously unharmed. So we have to have Doctor Strange find this person, find the file, and in the middle of the street anywhere, just miraculously Doctor Strange just is stalking this guy 24/11, and and he finds this guy miraculously somewhere in the middle of the street or in a basketball game, and ultimately he finds him and he's like, I need to know about your how like what did you do? Like I'm gonna comeback trail because he's showing him his hands like I need what you did. Like I need to find what you did. So we ultimately have this patient who is ultimately telling him some Pangborn, Jonathan Pangborn, ultimately telling him some miraculous story about this guy getting like piggyback rides or getting carried all the way to all these monk or guru mountains and everything like that to come up with these cures of Pangborn's mind. Because ultimately, uh, if he couldn't heal his body, maybe he could heal, like, better improve his mind. So that's what leads. That's what leads Pangborn to tell Strange. It's like, hey, you gotta head to the city. You gotta head to the city in the middle of the nowhere, and just gotta go there. So we have to where Doctor Strange spends every nickel and dime to be able to get here and get to this place, bizarrely. And so ultimately, he's consistently looking for this place that seems to be nowhere. And so ultimately, everybody's like, they're telling him where to go, they're giving him the pointer, and then they're giving him the middle finger. So we have Doctor Strange who ultimately looks exhausted because I don't think he's eaten or drank anything because ultimately he's now a hobo living on the streets trying to figure out where this uh, Kamatage is. And so reasonably we have it to where now Doctor Strange is of course getting mugged in the street where Strange is just like, I don't have any money. I don't have the money. But hey, how would I hit you in the face with my hands that already are just useless to me? So we find out that once Doctor Strange punches somebody in the face, that he freaking hurts his hands to where he's just like, this sucks. Can't even punch anybody in the face. I'm defenseless. Maybe I can kick people, but I guess that's not what he does. So we ultimately have Strange getting mugged, and ultimately they break his watch that ultimately was given to him, I guess, by Christine, because there's a little, uh, there's a little inscription on the back of the watch that ultimately is like from Christine. So it ultimately tells us that Strange still loves her to the point of like keeping the watch that she gave him, cementing like, hey, like there's still love us somehow, even though we had Doctor Strange who basically threw Christine under the bus when she goes and sees him, and she goes and sees him, and ultimately he's just like, why are you still here? Like, why? Like, am I your pity case? And she's like, I'm not here to pity you. It's like, then why are you here? So, and I thought that that whole like quasi breakup moment was very interesting to me. That whole, like, you could kind of see it from a mile away. You can see that Doctor Strange is kind of like demon in the bottle-ish like person, where he's just kind of drunk on like trying to solve this puzzle, into where he's going to throw everything else away to solve this puzzle, because to him he needs to solve everything, and this hand, like, the problem with his hands was a problem that he can't solve. So reasonably he's just like, well, if I'm not gonna be able to solve this problem, I gotta burn every bridge and have everyone that I love hate me because this problem is not solved. So we have it to where, again, Strange is getting mobbed, or mugged, I mean, in the middle of nowhere. And so ultimately we have Mordo, who ultimately comes to Strange's aid. And ultimately just protects him. And then gives him a little FaceTime and says, hey, yeah, you. You come with me. You're looking for Kamatage, huh? So we have Doctor Strange following this guy, and so reasonably we have Mordo, who is telling Strange, it's like, you know what, like, I was much like you when I came here, like kind of a crappy person like you. It's like, hey, how about you be more respectful when you come in here? Like, how about you give the ancient one a little bit of respect? Because reasonably you have like Doctor Strange, who is already like looking at the home of which that the supposedly ancient one is living in, and he's like, no, this doesn't quite look like this doesn't quite look like an establishment that the ancient one would be in. This establishment over here would be a much more of a house that the ancient one would live in. And Mordo's like, nah, like, dude, you're an a hole. Like, maybe when you come in here, like, maybe the ancient one will humble you a little bit, but like, but how about you kind of, whatever you think that you know, like, just throw that all away right now. Everything that you think you know, you don't know enough. You don't know enough about nothing. So just kind of take all that knowledge, throw it in the garbage, and just come with me on this journey. So we have it to where Strange goes in there, and ultimately he looks at the old man that is sitting, and traditionally we're just like, oh yeah, that's gonna be the ancient one, right? Definitely, that's gonna be the ancient one. Oh yeah, I'm sure. And then so recently we have the ancient one who is pouring Strange tea. He's like, oh, did you like that tea? And he's like, yeah, it's good tea. And so we have it to where the assistant of the ancient one, the guy that ultimately Strange thought was the ancient one, walks off, and the ancient one's like, "Oh hey, yeah, bye guy, bye, see you later." So we have the ancient one that is kind of mocking Strange a little bit. Like, I think she's really just mocking him because everything that Strange would think that he knows, like, always comes from out of a book. So the Ancient One is kind of delivering him, like, magic that is out of a book. Like, oh, this is acupuncture. Oh, this is this image. Oh, this is this image. Because really Strange has so much book smarts, but what he's doing now, what he's with right now, what he's trying to understand is something beyond something a book can tell him. Because the Ancient One is basically mentioning cell regeneration, like a healing factor of sorts. We've had several people in the Marvel Universe that have had a healing factor, but reasonably within this process, this really does take time. It takes years to learn. And so, reasonably, we have Strange, who is really not buying the fortune cookie like knowledge that the Ancient One is delivering. It's like, oh no, like, we're here to teach you magic. We're here to teach you sorcery. We're here to have your body want to heal itself. And so recently, like, Strange is like, I'm not buying this chakras and energies and stuff like that. I'm not buying this garbage. So we have to have the Ancient One who freaking like shoves out Strange's astro projection, punches the astro out of Strange, to ultimately have him go on a journey, an acid trip, so to speak, where ultimately he is seeing the stars and the moons and the solar systems and everything. He's seeing all kinds of things. And to the point where Ancient One is explaining all this, all the stuff that ultimately, like, hey, do you understand me now? Do you get me now? And ultimately, Mordo is mentioning, like, yeah, I think his heart rate is really high, and then Ancient One's like, no, I think he's fine. Like, I think he's okay. Let's keep going on. Let's keep pushing on. So we now have Doctor Strange going back into his own body from astral projection. And, like, I remember an episode where Batman, who ended up being buried alive, ended up astral projecting himself into other people's bodies so that way he could tell people, hey, I'm buried alive, help me out. I'd appreciate it. So I've seen some astral projection stuff going on in other things. I think on the Red Hood comic books and the early things, I think they also did astral projection. But anyways, so we have Strange, who eventually goes back into his body, is naturally assuming that they put something in his tea, like some LSD or some kind of drugs or some sorts. And so recently just gets to the point where the Ancient One is just getting frustrated with him, and ultimately she's just like, God, like, there's no convincing you that they're like that magic is a real thing. Like, there's no, like, you have to have the real, true, legitimate answer, and you're going to be racking your brain trying to find the answer, and it will never come to you. So we have it to where ultimately the Ancient One just shoves Stephen Strange out the door and just makes him wait out there. We ultimately find out that Doctor Strange has nowhere else to go. He wanted to learn what they had to offer him, but ultimately Ancient One's just like, no, I'm just gonna make you wait. I'm just gonna make you want this, and we have also Doctor Strange going, dude, I spent every cent that I had. I have nowhere else to go but here. So we have to where Strange has waited out outside their door for 5 days, knocking, going, "Hey, still here." We also have Mordo pleading with the Ancient One. Told me, say, "Hey, let this guy in. He's been here for 5 days." So here's a part that I didn't bring up. Let's transition back a little bit. Let's do a little bit of backwards work. So we have a character called Caecilius, who ultimately breaks into the Sanctum Sanctorum, or the the Doctor Strange home, the Doctor Strange's house, and ultimately ends up taking a book that ultimately has some magical power to be able to channel Dormammu's power, because ultimately Caecilius is channeling off of Dormammu's power, because reasonably Caecilius feels like the Ancient One has been doing the same thing. Keeping secrets from him, lying to him, and reasonably not showing him everything is really the point of which where Caecilius is really just ticked off that it feels like he had been betrayed by the Ancient One. Because ultimately, he was her apprentice. He was her, probably close to as possible, chosen one, but he decided to choose to go his own path. So Caecilius ends up taking the pages from this book to get the Ancient One's power, but recently the Ancient One had tried to take down Caecilius, but she only was able to take down seemingly his minions, but not actually him himself. Ultimately, he escapes before the Ancient One could really go and take everyone down. So we have we have to where ultimately Caecilius ends up using these pages, and the Ancient One had mentioned to him, it's like, the only thing that you're going to be able to find through those pages is sorrow. So we have to where Caecilius is using a pathway to use Dormammu's power, and now he is seen to be a much more legitimate threat to seemingly anyone. So Doctor Strange eventually gets back into the good graces of the Ancient One, and reasonably is pushed into training beyond beside everyone, showcasing how exactly they do their power, how exactly they start to uh, via certain accessories like a ring slinger, the ring, this like little like I would call it like a brass knuckle, but it only has like two fingers put into it. It's like a ring slinger where it kind of you can eventually teleport to other parts of the world, and kind of like an almost quasi jumper like fashion. The Anakin or the Hayden Christensen jumper movie. Anyways, so Michael Rooker was also in that movie as well. So yeah, the guy who played Ben Grimm and Samuel L. Jackson was also in that movie as well. Uh, yeah, the movie that was supposed to do a franchise of films and only did one film because it didn't evidently do good enough. The garbage is that. Anyways, so I ultimately liked that film. I thought it was a good film. But anyways, so going into this, we have now pushing into that Doctor Strange is ultimately pushed to uh, an extreme because ultimately Ancient One's just kind of like, dude, you're not learning fast enough. You're not learning fast enough, Doctor Strange. Ultimately, you're just consistently whining and crying about your hands aren't good enough. I don't give a about your hands, dude. One guy with no hand and he's better than you. Why is it that you suck so badly with two quasi hand like things, and there's some people without hands that are better than you? Suck it up, you garbage piece of crap. So we have it to where Ancient One is just shelling out Doctor Strange to Mount Everest, where he's gonna be cold as F. And so reasonably, she's like, "Yeah, you're gonna be cold here. You're probably gonna last like 2 minutes. So figure out that magic, boy. Figure out that magic. I'll see you later." And so we ultimately have Doctor Strange, who ultimately finally uses his magic to teleport himself over to uh, back to where he had came from in the Sanctum Sanctorum. So we eventually now have to eventually notice that there are these things called relics, weapons that ultimately will be chosen to people. We have Mordo, who seems to have a stick of sorts that ultimately makes a weapon, kind of like a whip and stuff like that. We have it to where Strange ultimately just kind of makes some kind of uh, he makes, like, I would call it some kind of like mystical string out of his hands. Like I would probably call it like a frisbee of sorts, or frisbee, a slinky of sorts out of his hands. Like if you took like a slinky and you like stretched it out, but ultimately it doesn't quite look like that because reasonably it's just. But that's like the kind of the visual that looks like that. It's like a slinky, but like it's his. I don't know. It's quasi tough to explain, but if anything, if you've seen the movie, you'll understand what I mean. But anyways, I thought that part was like really interesting. The whole relic point where they have to mention weapons and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting. Where it kind of cues up that it feels at some point that Doctor Strange is going to use his magic and say like all these words that are ultimately going to lead to all of these relics that he eventually can come and use at some point. Because reasonably, I when they were kind of, when Mordo was kind of mentioning about all the stuff, the abilities that he could use to fight off Strange. Like I thought that moment was really cool, and where Mordo was like, every time that you have to fight like your life depends on it because at some point it will depend on it. So pushing on, ultimately, we have Caelius, Caecilius, who breaks in to the Sanctum Sanctorum because he wanted some cereal. He's hungry. He breaks in because ultimately he wanted to take down the Sanctum Sanctorum because he needs to take down every Sanctum Sanctorum. We have evidently branches of Sanctum Sanctoriums that all have to be taken down, all have to be taken out. And so we have to where Kalios is trying to do that. So we eventually seem to have Strange, who eventually gets the eye of the Eye of Oromoto, or the Oromogo, or the green eye necklace thing that ultimately is seen through most of this movie when Doctor Strange possesses it, and ultimately is an important key thing to, of course, Endgame, and so on and so forth. So recently, within this portion, we have Doctor Strange is consistently reading every single book that Wong has. And ultimately, we have these funny moments where Benedict, where Strange comes in, ultimately to talk to Wong and try to make him laugh. And I thought these moments are still pretty funny. We have it to where uh, Doctor Strange talks to Wong and he's like, "Hey, what's your name?" And he's ultimately like, "Wong." He's like, "What's your first name?" And he's like, "Oh no, it's just Wong." It's like, "Oh, so like you're Adele, or you're Eminem, you're Cher, you're." And then ultimately, when he sees Wong again, he ultimately calls him Beyonce. To where ultimately we have Wong who's listening to Beyonce music, because ultimately he's like, "Dude, you cannot not know Beyonce. Like, come on, like you're not under that much far under a rock, are you?" So, and we also have when Mordo is showing Doctor Strange his his sleeping quarters. Ultimately, we have it to where Mordo gives Strange this piece of paper, and he's like, "What is this? Is this my mantra?" It's like, "No, that's a Wi-Fi password. Do you think we are savages?" So, and then ultimately we find that if there's a hard language for Strange to decipher, he has Google Translate as his best friend. So I'm gonna sneeze here in a second. Excuse me. Told you, I'm psychic. I have strange power. Anyways, no, I don't. So we have pushing on now, and so Strange is reading all these books. He's even astro projectingly reading books, and we have it to where it seems like people are kind of getting miffed a little bit that Strange is reading all these books. It's like, hey, Wong is starting to notice that there's books missing. Like, what do you got to say about that, Strange? Strange doesn't care. It's like, if anything, like, Wong was kind of threatening Strange before, and ultimately, Strange was making a crack about, like, late fees and stuff like that because Wong is basically just a librarian, really. So it's like Strange, like, yeah, he kind of was intimidated by Wong, but when looking at it, it's like, dude, you're just a librarian to me. It's like, yeah, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? So Doctor Strange is consistently taking books that he shouldn't have, and then eventually he gets to a point where ultimately he takes the eye, the necklace, and then he takes an apple and he figures out how to adjust the time continuum with an apple, making an apple seem whole and then unwhole and then dead and then undead and back and forth again. And ultimately it seems that Doctor Strange is almost coming to the same cues as his predecessor, Caecilius, and because Mordo and Wong ultimately like bump in on or come in on him Strange using this time travel. And so ultimately, Wong and Mordo is like, you don't know what you're messing with. Like, if anything, like, man, you could accidentally mess up and live one moment into an endless loop. And yeah, or you could stop time completely. So recently we have it to where Kalios is eventually going to have to confront the Ancient One. And so, because really we're having it to where all of these other Sanctorums are just getting annihilated. Easily to where eventually we get to where we have where Strange is getting showcased all these relics, ultimately just like, hey, look how great they all look, right? Look how awesome and cool that they all are. And we have Strange getting a grand tour, and while this is going on, we have eventually Kalios breaking into the Sanctum Sanctorum, or Sanctum Sanctorum. And I don't know how it's pronounced. It's probably Torium, but I don't know. Uh, and we ultimately have Kalios breaking in because ultimately he wants to do a little chat with the Ancient One. We have it to where the Ancient One teaches Strange to do this mirrorverse. Ultimately, if he uses powers that he thinks are too dangerous, he will be safe in this mirrorverse. And which leads the Ancient One to have to forcibly talk with Kalios and try to talk him down. And so we ultimately have Kalios coming into the Sanctorum, and we have eventually where him and his guys are eventually fighting Doctor Strange. To ultimately we end up finding out that, hey, Strange's cape is one of these relics, and Strange's cape is going to come to his aid and otherwise help him out with being able to fight these guys. This fight is going on seemingly forever, to where the point to where Doctor Strange even actually gets stabbed, to where he has to go to his hospital that he knows full well and have Palmer treat him for a stab wound that ultimately Palmer has to inject him and be able to sew him back together. And Strange is astro projecting at this point to help her treat him. And while that's going on, there is also one of Kalios' minions that is coming and trying to fight Strange. And we have this interesting, like, defibrillator moment where I finally can say that freaking word, because I usually say paddle moment. We have the defibrillator moment where ultimately Palmer tries to defibrillate Strange and then ends up helping him in this battle. And we have Strange where he's like mentioning, like, defibrillate me again, because I want to take out this guy. So pushing on to where Strange comes back from his astral projection to need to go back to help everyone. But that eventually leads to Kilios talking to Ancient One, and Doctor Strange and Mordo end up finding the truth about the Ancient One, that the Ancient One has the symbol of Mordo, or Mordo, the symbol of Dormammu on her forehead. So Mordo feels betrayed, and the Ancient One is like, it's like, hey, I did this for the right reasons. Like, I did this. Uh, excuse me. I did this for our people. I did this for everyone. And so Michaelios is like, hey, you lied to us. You didn't show us everything. You cheated to get your power. You cheated uh, by siphoning off the power of a even much more powerful being, which is Dormammu. And so now that I found that out, now that I'm going to take this power and use it as well, like reasonably, like I'm like as equal to you now. I'm your equal instead of your pupil. I am your equal. So it gets to the point to where Kilios eventually takes down the Ancient One to the point where she has to also get to be able to go to the hospital as well. And Strange is fighting Kalios because ultimately people were getting annihilated in this sanctorum. I don't know what the word is. The place of which the house of which Strange is living in, the Sorcerer Supreme. So the taco, I guess. So we have to where Strange takes out Kalios by putting him in this weird contraption that ultimately makes him like be able to shift and change his body to a certain position to where wow, yawning my head off. To reasonably Kalios is talking and Strange is letting him talk, but whatever Kalios is saying, Strange ain't buying. So we go on further to eventually have it to where Kalios eventually gets free and reasonably is trying to wipe out every single one of these barriers, uh, every single one of these sanctums uh, to welcome Dormammu. And so reasonably we are getting all these sanctums just annihilated, and to the point to where pushing us on to ultimately one have Strange ultimately when he gets taken care of by Christine. Like we do kind of have this moment where ultimately Strange is realizing how much that he really needed Christine and how like sorry he was by kind of like treating her like garbage and treating her like what do I really need you for when ultimately he uh, does need her. He has a watch that reminds her every moment of her, and reasonably like Strange is ultimately for so long having to desperately say that he doesn't need anyone, but he does. He does need people. If ultimately if a doctor had no patience, then ultimately he wouldn't need for anything, but or he would not need anyone. But when looking at it, the doctor patient thing is a collaboration, is a uh, so being a doctor, you do need people. It's just saying that you don't need anyone is just the fact that you're just kind of just not thinking of the big scope or the big picture or the whatever. So, anyways, we end up having eventually to where Doctor Strange and the Ancient One are astral projecting together, kind of having this moment of the Ancient One basically telling him goodbye and telling him that eventually he's going to die, and so basically Strange has to be the Sorcerer Supreme. He has to be the guy because the Ancient One's gonna die. So we have it to where they are forcibly having to go to Tokyo because reasonably that is the last sanctum that is left before Dormammu is going to make his way down. It's like, yeah, I'm here, baby. I'm here. I'm here to kill you all. So, because Kalios ends up coming with his group of people to take down the sanctum, and reasonably before the sanctum falls, we have to where Strange is of course using his time ability, and so ultimately he stops the building from falling, and ultimately he is trying to control Mordo or control Wong, and here's where we also have Kalios that ultimately is also realizing this trick, and ultimately he is also like trying to fight off Strange to ultimately have him stop trying to go back in time. But we have it to where Strange just pushes on to go like, well, okay, if I fight Kalios, this is a fight that I can't win. But ultimately, I'm going to go and find Dormammu, and here's where he will come to bargain. Dormammu, come to bargain. So, reasonably, now we have the montage of Strange repetitiously getting killed over and over again. Dormammu, come to bargain. Dormammu, bargain. Mamu, bargain. Dormammu, come to bargain. Yeah, I'm all up in that bargain. So, yeah, I like this whole scene. I think that this scene is really kind of funny because you're just seeing Doctor Strange repetitiously die over and over and over again for him to just fly back in and just be like, Dormammu, guess what? Bargain. Repetitiously, just coming on in, and to the point to where, like, at first, like, Dormammu isn't quite catching on, but then eventually more and more he's like, what is this? So we eventually find out that Doctor Strange had created this time loop where it not only traps Doctor Strange, but it also tracks Dormammu from ever being able to come to his world. And I thought, like, okay, so if Strange can't feel that he can win by beating Kalios, then he's gonna go to Dormammu and try to and just stalemate him out. Troll me like, hey, the world will continue on living. The Earth will continue to spin, but me and you are just gonna be here for eternity, and you're just gonna keep repetitiously trying to kill me, and we're just going to be doing this forever. To where ultimately Dormammu, after numerous attempts, is just like, make it stop, Make it stop. So we have it to where Strange is making the play of like, well, okay, like, well, you and your minions, just like get rid of them. You need to leave. You need to never come onto my plane of existence, my Earth, ever. So we have it to where Dormammu makes that pledge ultimately to, yeah, I'm not gonna mess with you. You're gonna outsmart me. So we ultimately have it to where Strange makes his way back onto Earth, and we have Kilios, who eventually just kind of bizarrely like turns into this like black-ish like character and just gets sucked into where Dormammu was. And ultimately, there was a side effect to Kalios using the magic that he did, and I guess that Dormammu just ends up consuming him, because that's the whole thing of just like, well, since you had taken some of Dormammu's power, Dormammu was just going to be able to take you as well. So we eventually have Strange turning back the time to have the sanctum that is in Tokyo still exist. And so reasonably everybody's thinking that they won, or everybody's assessing that they have won. So really we have Mordo, who at the end of this though is just like, well, hey, like, it's great that like if it feels like we won, but I do not want to be a part of these teachings. I don't want to be a part of this team. Because if anything, like, you're cheating to win. And I don't like that. Like, basically at some point every shortcut that you do, uh everything that you every bit of time that you shift or change or shake up, eventually there's going to be a cost to that. There's going to be a rip in the time continuum and this and that. It's like, if anything, the bill will come due eventually to you for for taking this time for cheating to win, basically. That is what Strange has done. That is what the Ancient One has done. Cheated to win. And so, reasonably, that's when you would get like the David Copperfields and the sleight of hand guys that would basically like later on show you how they did the trick. The Houdinis, they would show you how they did the trick years later, but it's like, oh, so you cheated to win. It's like, oh no, well, I had this certain skill. Well, I had this. Yeah, but that's like, you cheated to win. So that's what I like about the very end of this is Mordo is ultimately just like, dude, you've opened a can of worms. When is it when is it going to stop being a point that you're not going to keep using this power to your advantage to cheat to win? When is it going to ever stop? And we ultimately see in Avengers Endgame that, again, Doctor Strange cheats to win, or cheats to figure out the one scenario that ultimately helps him through Endgame. Possibly. Because ultimately, we have Thanos and we have a number of other huge threats of sorts to go up against Thanos, like Captain Marvel, right? And Thor with Stormbreaker and all kinds of other things. Ultimately, speaking of Thor, end credit scene ultimately has Thor drinking a little beer. Ultimately, talking about what is to happen on Thor Ragnarok. And so, reason I guess I haven't even gotten into any of the Thor movies yet, which eventually I guess I will have to get to there at some point and talk about those. Even though I have seen all of them, I've seen all of the Marvel movies, even with some of the ones I didn't really ultimately enjoy. But luckily, I won't be able to have to review Ant Man and the Wasp again because I'm not going to review that. No. I will just re put that out there. Um, and just redo. I'm not going. I'm never going to review Ant Man and the Wasp again. I don't think I'm ever going to rewatch that movie again. Cause no, I'll rewatch Venom again. Because ultimately I want a different perspective on that, and I want a different kind of review on that. So eventually that will be coming somewhere down the line fairly soon. I hope. I want to watch that movie because I enjoy it. Maybe I'll feel differently about the movie, but because ultimately I think the review that I had was when originally the review that I had was when I saw it in theaters, but I think now I'm just going to be re-reviewing it and just kind of doing it later on and making adjustments. But anyways, I like this movie. Like portions of it was pretty good. It was just the fact that it's like that we have Doctor Strange and we like haven't really gotten much to a consensus of this character. Really, he there is no real come to Jesus moment with Doctor Strange like eventually Iron Man does, which kind of annoys me that like we don't have like in Iron Man 1 we have eventually Tony Stark who realizes that oh my god like my company's dealing under the table and I have led to the destruction of thousands upon thousands of lives and now I need to correct this. I need to keep people out of harm's way and ultimately I need to keep them even out of harm's way from myself because I don't know what's going on with my own company. I don't know what's going on with my stuff. So I need to take matters into my own hands and take these weapons out of enemies' hands and take them out, take them down, whichever one have you. But Doctor Strange never has that moment of oh crap, oh crap. This is my learning point. This is my learning moment. And I hope that we will get that somewhere. I hope that Strange uh, kind of like we have it to where ultimately you could say it's like, oh no, like Doctor Strange was humbled by the Ancient One once she astral projected him and showed him all that stuff. Like that humbled him, and uh, that desperately where he's like, teach me, and she's like, no. Like you could ultimately break that down and say, oh well, no, that's the humble moment. That's where he changed. That's where ultimately he uh, broke down and was different. I'm like, no, that was just a power hungry person that ultimately he saw what she was doing as a way to solve his problem. Still, And so for me, I never think that this person actually ever changes. He's still that same old person that even through Endgame still hasn't still hasn't learned anything. Still hasn't. This guy doesn't need to like seemingly change for anybody, and he eventually needs to eventually have someone who is overly powerful than him to basically crush him, to force him into realizing that he he needs to change. You can't cheat to win. You can't think that life for you is going to be a piece of cake. Because that's what I think Strange's life has led him to be, is just a piece of cake that ultimately he can take whenever he wants and just nom nom nom. Yeah, that my life is so great. I just have a life of cake. Yeah, this is great, and I never gain a pound, and I never life's great. Life is grand. Uh, Everything works out in the end. Strange needs to learn that it won't always work out in the end for him. And he needs to get to that point, and I can't wait for that moment to happen. I'm waiting for it still. Um, Strange, in Star Trek terms, needs to learn that there are no win scenarios. Queuing it up from Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru. That eventually he is going to have to lose. Ultimately, we could say it's like, oh, well, he was Avenger. Technically, he did lose. No. No. Uh, that was not him. That was not on him completely. That was on a team that he was barely on. That was on a team that he barely knew anybody who they were. That was not like he was not having that cross to bear for that team. Really, he wasn't. And to me, Strange still cheated to win. And so the ancient one was like, oh yeah, Strange. He likes to cheat to win. So there must be something to him cheating all the time, because heaven forbid he actually like really does the work. So we're gonna wait for Strange to do that work. We're gonna wait till he stops cheating and stops like putting cards into his sleeve. And so that'll be the day that I'll be interested in watching this character, and I hope we'll see that the evolving Doctor Strange. But I think the whole a-hole act where Doctor Strange goes into is going to get old for a lot of people, because really he's eventually going to, I guess, be tied to Peter. How is he going to be an a-hole to Peter Parker all the time? That makes no sense. Like, even at some point, like, Tony had to warm up to Peter. There was points where, like, when you look at it, like, Tony was way different to Peter than he was to anyone else. And, like, Tony saw, like, he saw Peter as being like, he had to be a father figure to him. And like I don't see Strange being a father figure to Peter because he's an a-hole. So I don't quite understand how exactly he's gonna like all of a sudden be all of a sudden this like dad to Peter. We'll have to see how that comes up and how that comes across on film. Um, because I don't get how we're gonna all of a sudden have this character who has yet to really have a film come to this strange adjustment of over a period of time. I don't get it. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.